In the tapestry of our human existence, both at a collective and an individualistic level, there is something so satisfying about discovery. People talk about this dopamine hit when they use social media. And sometimes it's spoken with this, disdain. And you'll even hear parents talking about technology with a certain level of disdain. I happen to remember what it was like as the information age was starting to blossom, and AOL chat rooms, and actually even before that, bulletin boards, were the gateway to this experience of expansion. And you could wander around the World Wide Web asking Jeeves and stumbling into different little portals and finding all of these discussions and other human beings. And the feeling that I had was this sense of awe and appreciation and curiosity, unbridled curiosity even. And I felt the same way when I played my very first massive multi-online role-playing game, where I realized that the other players were other people. And I remember talking to my partner at the time with this disbelief and this awe, saying, we're playing with other people live all around the world. And it was so incredibly interesting and engaging and exciting. And now fast forward, we have devices in the palms of our hands, which are endless scrolling and portals to other glimpses around the world and other worlds. And now we've grown accustomed to it, where it is part of our day-to-day life. And we have changed as a result. But in one way, fundamentally, we have not changed. And that is that we love discovery. In fact, we might be wired for it. If you still believe in the traditional neuroscience models, I grew up this way, mainstream education. I am actually a neuroscientist by training. And so if you really believe that all of your totality of your experience can be reduced down to a series of neurons firing, then you will be delighted to know that your brain in the frontal lobe interfaces with the reward pathway. And when you encounter a stimulus that is novel, you have specific sets of dopaminergic neurons that do. And this is what social media capitalizes on. This is why it works. Because over time, those neurons fire less when you have repeated exposures to the same stimulus. And so instead of it will be like a do, and then it'll be like a do. And you're on to searching for the next greatest thing. So let's put this in perspective for a moment and go back to the earlier part of the conversation, the monologue, and ask ourselves, is it really a problem? Is social media the problem? Or is it how our brains are wired? Are we, in fact, driven for endless discovery? And social media is just the vehicle for which to solve this problem and captivate our attention. It may not be social media for you. It could be an endless string of hobbies that after you get to a certain point of mastery, you get bored. And so you move on to the next challenge. It could be playing sports. It could be of a sensual pleasure seeking nature, or even a food pleasure. You could be a connoisseur of restaurants and foodie experiences. And whatever it looks like for you, your brain, particularly if you believe that you are the summation of what's happening in your brain is wired. You think you have free will, but you don't. Not in this way. Perhaps you have free will in other ways. But if your brain is wired to respond to new stimuli, then naturally over time, you are going to feel like you're always searching for the next discovery. It's really quite simple. In a materialist, reductionist world, it is actually quite simple. Now we've explained unconscious human behavior across the board, ubiquitously. And so what we're finding here is that we're looking at the symptoms rather than the causes. And we're saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be this into X. Or, oh, you shouldn't be constantly looking for the next best, whatever it is for you. And this can easily veer into addictive behaviors if you're not careful, because that pathway gets hijacked and pushed to the edge of that spectrum, and that reward-seeking, novelty-seeking, next hit-seeking edge of the existence. And some people like to throttle their existence to remind themselves that they are indeed alive, because inside they feel so dead, and they feel so whatever discomfort and gnawing dissatisfaction that they have, that I touched on in the last episode. And where this can go south is where people escape that pain and that dissonance, or try to bury it through this seeking of pleasure and worldly pleasures. And when we look at this from a spiritual connotation, it's easy to say that it's the world that is the problem, that you should just give up all pleasures, all desires. And I would say, let's look at it from a different perspective, a transhumanism perspective, and ask ourselves, if we were designing an upgraded human, I'm not asking you to get any chip or any weird Orwellian things. No, I'm asking to have a conversation that if we were designing the next version of us, and we were the ones that were in charge of dictating what would happen with that technology and how it would be implemented, there's no victims here. I'm not asking you to sign up to be a victim. I know in the transhumanism debate, I've lost a lot of listeners because I'm pro-transhumanism, because the narrative that is pushed in society is that there is only one option, and it is that you will be a slave and obey, and that is it. And I'm asking to co-create a different option and to say, hey, we have options. Who said that we don't have options? I'm not signing up for that. Neither should you, right? But we have to create the other option. And the first step in creation is discussion and is thinking. And so if you were to design, now understanding the fundamental nature of the brain and the unconscious behavior patterns that are laid down in all humans. By the way, perhaps we've always been transhuman. I'm just saying. It's an interesting world out there. So if we were designing a solution to eradicate all addictions, how would you go about doing that, solving it through transhumanism? Is it possible? Absolutely. So if the brain is naturally wired to whenever you encounter something new and exciting, and if that creates this unnecessary feedback loop that keeps us locked into these repetitive cycles of suffering that we deem as suffering, And we're just moving from the next attention hijacking thing to the next, right? How can we shift this innate functioning in our brains to make it work for us? Well, I believe that we should have a shutoff valve. And we should be able to turn it on and turn it off. Like, let's say that we're developing an unhealthy relationship to alcohol, even though it's socially acceptable. We should be able to say, you know what? For this, I want to modulate my brain activity. And I want to say that I'm not going to receive any connection with my reward pathway because for whatever reason, my genetic predisposition, it's going to lead me in a direction that I don't want to go in. So, boop, we down-regulate it. Or we could just say that we're going to have periods in our life where we're going to turn this feature on. Perhaps it's when we go on a sabbatical or a vacation, and we know that we need to enrich our lives with some interesting experiences, and we want the curiosity, because that curiosity is what drives us forward. It keeps us out of stagnation. You could say that this is a feature of humanity that keeps innovation going, that keeps people creating, that actually keeps our society advancing. Otherwise, we would just wallow away in a pit of nothingness and just be roly-polies, laying around in bed all day with no desire to do anything, much less create in the world. And so perhaps this feature is advantageous to us. It is what propels us to go to school, to educate ourselves, to edify our knowledge base. And so perhaps we want to keep it in some areas and not in others, or at certain time points in our lives. And so then we could say, instead of this being an unconscious automatic function that just happens like breathing in the background and then dictates our behavior unbeknownst to us, right? Unless you're a neuroscientist, you don't know this. And then you're just looking around at social media and the social media companies and you're saying, they're the problems. No, because if it wasn't them, there would be something else that our attention would be anchored into. Because it is a natural part of what it means to be human. Oh, it's the internet. Okay, so let's now remove the internet and we're going to go backwards in time and, oh, it's those porno mags. You know what I mean? Oh, it's those language schools and it's those intramural, like we put these value judgments on where it is socially acceptable to spend our attention and to spend our energy. And there are a lot of opinions about how people do that and why people do that. And it's all valuable from a certain perspective. But when you feel like you don't have a choice and you don't understand why you don't have a choice, it's helpful to take this higher perspective and understand how you're wired and what's happening under your hood. Because it's not the symptoms that are the problems. It's something much deeper that at the end of the day, you need to explore. That's it. That's it. At the end of the day, you need to expand. You need to grow. You need to change. You need to have different stimuli and enrichment of experiences. And without that, you feel bored. We all do. You feel numb. You feel, unless you enrich your life with meaning, you will feel that emptiness that drives people to compulsivity, that drives people to consumerism behavior, cliche consumerism behavior, and wondering why the dopamine hit is just, it wears off so quickly. You just buy and you buy and you buy, and it just, poof, it's gone. And so when you start to understand how our behaviors are orienting towards building an enriched, meaningful life, you can start to see that it's an opportunity in disguise. That, in fact, maybe there are no issues with consumerism in of itself and social media behavior in of itself. Perhaps it's actually all just symptomatic of this underlying need for every human to keep pushing the edge of the envelope. And where that is being pushed is not in their control when there's not awareness that that's all it is. And when you have the awareness that that's all it is, all of a sudden you have a different life unfolding in front of you, where you can now be the master of your own attention. And by taking that natural inclination, you can build something magnificent with this understanding that you can work with the natural systems in your mind. You can harness what is already there and point it in the right direction to make it actually work to your benefit instead of to your detriment. And that is one of the most beautiful parts of discovery.